Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of the Ron Blank and Associates Manufacturer Webinar Series, a monthly broadcast series focused on the expansion of knowledge for the building product manufacturing industry. I'm your moderator today, Breanne Dillard. And today's webinar is BIM and Beyond, how the Revit workflow wins projects, and is hosted by Ron Blank and Associates and facilitated by BIM Object. Participants are in a listen-only mode during the webinar presentation. However, questions may be submitted within the questions area during the webinar and are definitely encouraged. If you do not see the questions box, you'll click the orange arrow to expand the GoToWebinar dashboard. Then you'll click on the triangle icon next to where it says questions to expand that questions box, enter your text and click send to submit your question in real time. You'll see an example of this process on your screen now. And I'll ask as many questions as time allows, but if we need to follow up with those at the end with Jim, he will definitely get those answered for you. If you found the questions box, if you go ahead and type a quick hello and found it message and let us know you were able to locate that, we would greatly appreciate it. Our presenter today is Jim Conger. Jim is a successful BIM professional that speaks frequently at Autodesk University and other industry events. He has worked in the construction industry for over 20 years and specializes in educating both the design build stakeholders and the building product manufacturers on how to communicate more efficiently with one another. When he is not speaking, he works with North American AECO and building product manufacturers driving innovations and workflow communications. Jim has seen the construction marketplace from many different angles, working as a manufacturer, contractor, distributor, and construction marketing manager, and currently sits on committees for the Digital Build Environment Institute and the Digital Twin Consortium. He has also chaired the technical committee for the Los Angeles chapter of the Construction Specification Institute. One of Jim's goals is to help create an environment in which the design tools provided by manufacturers meet the needs of their customers and help them make the design workflow more efficient for everyone. Jim, thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Let me share my screen. I want to welcome you to BIM and Beyond, how the Revit workflow wins projects. I've been on, like she said, I've been on many different sides of the construction industry. I worked in manufacturing for about a decade and had to sell to architects and engineers myself, so I have a little bit of understanding on where the manufacturer's challenges are. Things have changed since BIM has taken hold right after the recession in 2011 is when it really took off. So things have changed, but pretty much it stays the same. We need to get into projects so that the contractors can help or know that we are the products to bid on. Let me turn my camera off and focus in on the presentation now. So the webinar objective, BIM basics. This is really review for those of you in the audience that are not familiar with BIM or have a very, very high level view of BIM. Then we're going to move over to the BIM workflow. This is going to understand how your design customers work within the BIM workflow so that you guys can understand where you fit into it and where the opportunities are for you. BIM content, we will talk about BIM content because there is a bunch of different ways that different materials and products fit into the BIM model, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to open it up for discussion where you can type in your questions and we will attempt to answer them or refer back to them later. This is an interesting quote. BIM is to construction what HTML is to the internet. I really like this quote. Phil Bernstein is kind of a BIM celebrity. Autodesk uses a lot of his insight into BIM in their marketing materials and when they're doing education. And really what this means is your product information and the geometry as well as the metadata that goes along with your product information is like the code that creates the internet. So BIM is to the plans and construction what HTML, which is the code that created the internet. So really it's you, the manufacturer, integral part to this BIM workflow. And nowadays you are invited to this BIM party, whereas back in the 2011, 2012, a lot of architects and engineers were struggling just to get doors and windows and HVAC systems in their model. Now they're collaborating much closer with manufacturers to make sure that their design intent is carried on over into the actual build environment. This gives you an idea on the wave. Now, this is just from BIM Objects Outlook. We are the largest platform in the world, so we have the most data of anybody. So this is very representative of what the whole industry have seen. You could see back in 2012, the use of BIM, it was not as high. As the architects and engineers were coming out of the recession, they were just cutting their teeth as far as understanding how to create BIM models. And transitioning from that AutoCAD workflow to the BIM workflow. So they were really just putting generic objects in. They were putting some manufacturer specific objects in, but as you see the years progress, the use of BIM explodes. And this is where we want to help you ride this BIM wave. It's not too late to get involved, but it's about time that you probably need to get serious about getting involved in the BIM workflow. Manufacturers, you provide information to build the relationships and get specified on the projects. Design teams get the information from you to make product decisions and to document their design intent. That's the important part, is the documentation. When I was in the materials manufacturing side of the business, the goal was to get specified on the project. I think we all can agree that if you're spec'd into a project, and that's what the general contractors and subcontractors are bidding off of, then you have a good chance you're going to get in that project. If your name does not show up in that project documentation, then you have a struggle to get in and get your product purchased. So you always want to try to get in as early as possible. And the perfect situation is when you are the product of choice with no equals. However, that doesn't happen a lot, especially on public works jobs. So we have to try to focus in on getting that basis of design badge on our name in the specifications, because we know that if we get that top billing, that there's a good chance that we will win that project and ultimately ship our product to the site. So what is BIM and why is it important to you guys? Well, first off, let's get back to the basics. This is BIM for the newbies. So BIM is building information modeling. It is a workflow theory. There is no product called BIM. Revit is the brand name of the BIM software from Autodesk that has taken over the world, pretty much is ubiquitous in all design trades, and it is the software that achieves the BIM workflow. But of course, people in our industry love to use BIM and Revit interchangeably. I am guilty of this myself, but ultimately, when you hear BIM, we're most likely talking about Revit, and when we're talking about Revit, we're most definitely talking about BIM. So I kind of like to think of it as bandages and band-aids. A lot of us use those interchangeably, but band-aids is actually the brand, and bandages is the type of product that band-aids are. And so that's how we kind of use that to confuse everybody, of course. So first and foremost, BIM is a documentation tool. This is how they create the plans and direct what products get into the specs. So that is the most important aspect of this, as we are all sitting on this phone trying to figure out how to get our products placed into more projects. The documentation is ultimately the goal for that process. Obviously, that's the first goal. The second goal is then to retain that spec and actually get purchased on the project. BIM is a set of standards for the digital building design. So if you're an architect, you're working off the same standards as a general contractor, as the engineer, as the owner. So everybody kind of has agreed to use this platform, the BIM platform, as a way to collaborate, whether you're a frontline design professional like an architect or engineer, or you're a builder like a general contractor. We all have to be able to communicate off the same platform. It is a shared data model. In other words, these Revit designs or BIM designs are made so that an architect can create them, an engineer can create them, the design team can create them, and then the build team can then be shared with that model so that they don't have to start from scratch. Sometimes they will increase the level of detail in the model because contractors obviously are worried about the fabrication of it. But ultimately for us as manufacturers, the first goal is to be that product that they use in their building design model. And it does require manufacturer's content. Can they create a Revit project off of generic data? Sure. However, that's kind of old school. That was what people did, and then they're just trying to get their hands around the BIM workflow, early days of BIM. Now they're not only find a advantage to using your specific product data in their project, but a lot of the owners are requiring that they don't use generic data anymore, because when the whole Bennett value statement to an owner for using the BIM workflow is that then they can turn it into a 3D model that they can run their project off of. And it's hard to run a project off of, or a building off of a generic product, because nobody makes generic products. We all make branded products. So who uses BIM? Architects, engineers, and their support staff, like landscape architects, interior designers are the design support. Then you also have contractors. They need to know how to schedule these jobs and where to put stuff. And if there's clashes between an HVAC and a lighting fixture, they need to know all that information, because it's much cheaper for them to fix it in the BIM digital model than it is to do it on site. That's where we get a lot of those change orders, and those cost money. And of course, owners. Some owners, if you're just building one building, you're probably going to rely on architect and designers and the contractors to do it. But there are large serial owners, government being one of them, large data center companies, like all of our tech companies have a ton of real estate and buildings that they're managing. They are very interested in using BIM because this gives them that ultimate goal of that digital twin, which they can run their facility off of. Plus, the other added bonus is it decreases the time from design to commissioning of that building, and it also a lot of times will reduce the cost to the owners. So it's a benefit to everybody. To make it kind of simplified, BIM, if you think of them in the world of Legos, generally, you have your real Lego product. It's what you want in your design. CAD, the AutoCAD, was just line, circles, and arcs that depicted it. There was no metadata attached to it. It was just literally a picture of your product. BIM is more than just the geometry. This is where I see a lot of manufacturers get confused, is that they think it's just 3D modeling. It is not. If this was just 3D modeling, there's no reason why we would have spent all this time learning how to design in 3D as opposed to 2D. 2D was fine at just the layouts of the project. So what really the value proposition that BIM brings to every stakeholder in this workflow is that it is a geometric item as well as the metadata that goes along with it. Can you imagine if you're a HVAC manufacturer, you have this box that is a chiller, and it really is just a box that needs to set up on top of the building or on the side of the building. But if that was all that defined your product, which was your geometry, that'd be a very weird thing. Realistically, what we're really worried about is what is the metadata? How many BTUs is it pumping out? What is all that stuff that's on your data sheet that you can't depict in pictures? That is also attached to these BIM files so that they can do analysis like energy analysis, lighting analysis. Those are the types of things they're doing within this project. So it is not just geometric. And because this is 3D, we've moved to the world of 3D. It has opened up a benefit to us manufacturers, because your design customers are required to build these objects. And if they were going to take your lighting fixture or your HVAC system and build it from scratch, it would take them hours. Just like hardly any of us, some of you guys are better than others, I'm sure, but hardly any of us actually every night for dinner go out and buy raw ingredients and start making dinner from scratch. If you are, I commend you. However, that's not the reality of our world. We obviously, a lot of times, will go for those pre-prepared products, dishes to make our dinners and stuff like that. And the reason is because we just don't have the time. Same thing happens with the design customers. They don't have time to spend 5 hours on every product they're going to install into a project. So they're really relying on the manufacturers to provide them that ready-made item that they can drop in like a Lego piece that carries all the important data that's going to fill out the schedules and help them run their analysis, as well as tell them physically if it's going to interfere with another item they put in that project. They're looking for you to do that. So it literally can take 5 to 10 hours for us to create a Revit file. Yet if it's already created for me, it literally takes me 1 or 2 minutes to download it and plop it into my project. And that will carry on to the schedule, just carry on to the specifications, which is where we start making our return on investment as manufacturers. So what's the history? Well, I think a lot of us know the history. We all started out with pencil drawings on our architectural drawings. We did it in pencil and we wrote the specifications by hand a lot of times. But then in the 70s, I believe, late 60s, 70s, the AutoCAD came about, computers came about and started moving that analog workflow to a more digital workflow. I almost call this the digital analog stage because it was on a computer. However, it's still lines, circles, and arcs that were put together to represent a 3D object, but it was in 2D most of the time, especially when you're talking about buildings that we were building, facilities. So we were doing that on PCs. That helped a little bit with efficiency. And then we were using word processors like Word and WordPerfect to write the project specifications. And the two documents come out, of course, are the plans that came out of AutoCAD and the specs that came out of Word. That was great. However, now we've evolved to using BIM, which is, fancy 3D CAD with smart metadata, a database of metadata behind it, and automated specifications on PC. This is really nice because one of the things that happened, like if I was an architect and I had this window on the right-hand side of the garage here, and I need to move it over 5 inches, I can do that in Revit and it'll automatically update all of my elevations, all of my other sheets that I may have created that window in. So I don't have to go back to every sheet like I used to have to do with AutoCAD and update those sheets. It automatically moves it. So all my project documentation follows that 6-inch move of that window. So it makes it extremely, extremely efficient for architects and engineers. And that is why if you went out and talked to 100 of your architects and engineers, darn near 100 of them would tell you that they're using BIM or Revit as their documentation tool. The plans that we all bid on, our subcontractors and general contractors bid on, were now pretty much across the board were created with a 3D BIM model. So you can see here is the 3D file, and then this is the floor plans that are derived out of it for bidding purposes and construction purposes. So how does that workflow work? You have Revit 3D model with metadata. So you have your HVAC object, you place it into the project, then that database, that metadata that is attached to that will automatically fill out the equipment schedules, which then will be handed over to the specification manager and to create those specifications. One of the interesting things here, I did a survey about 2 years ago under the Digital Built Environment Institute organization I work for, and we surveyed designers to ask them, who is doing these documentation roles? And what we found out, surprisingly, was 15% of the firms we polled, the people that are doing the Revit design are also the people doing the specification. So they've combined those roles to almost being not a BIM manager or a spec manager, but a technical or a construction documents manager. And so that's 15%. Another 40 to 50% of the firms that we polled have a direct line of sight between the Revit model and the specification. In other words, what they do is their workflow is they output all the products that they've included in their Revit file into a schedule, hand that to the specifier and say, write me specs based on these products. So that's how you're getting these basis of design specs That's some of the ways you're getting those basic design specs, is because they use your product in that Revit file, whether or not you provided them that file or they created your product from scratch. So really what it comes down to is marketing. So we now, as manufacturers, have a way to not just do pretty, trade shows and do pretty like magazines, but we have ways to use our technical documentation to market with. And it's a great way to not only provide a service to your design customers, but it gives us a way to now understand who's working and designing with our products in that early design stage, so that we can get in and build those relationships, so that we can get in and make sure they're using the right products and kind of overview. Architects and engineers, believe it or not, really enjoy when a manufacturer calls them when they're needed. And the best way to know when they're needed is when they download that Revit object. You should be on the phone with them pretty quickly after they download it, because they're obviously interested in your product right then and there, and be that service provider for them. Be that that subject matter expert that they're looking for, because that's what's going to help them think of you next time they have a project that has a need for your product type. You want them to just be the first person, you are the first person they think of when they're dealing with your product type. I can tell you from my experience, I did a fairly good job of this when I was a material manufacturer. I left the manufacturing side in 2009, and still to this day, about once a year, I will get a call from an architect because he had my name in his spec and my phone number in my spec, in his spec, and they will call me over and over again when they had a need for the product that I was doing. So even though I've been out of it for over 10 years, I'm still getting calls from architects. Now, it used to be every week, multiple times a week when I left, but it has died down to about once a year now, which is still pretty impressive to me. And that's really the annuity that we're building as building product manufacturers, is getting that relationship to the point where you're the first person they think of. So let's look what happened in the 2020. So up between 2011 and 2020, we had a you saw that sharp increase in usage. Well, now what is happening? So in 2020s, we've had a interesting time, as we all are very aware of, where the digital world has become way more important. So you can see from January 2020 on, which is right before the lockdowns and COVID hit, we had our traditional growth pattern. However, you can see it start spiking up when you start bringing in these lockdowns, because everybody had to get home. Everybody pretty much had to start using this digital design workflow much more judiciously. So they couldn't get away with generic objects, because then the next person down the road is not going to know what kind of product you're talking about, and it just jumbles up the message. So they had to start using manufactured design. And like I said, you can see here from January 2020 till today, we've almost doubled in download quantity. And this kind of gives you an idea. We at BIM Object, we more than doubled the growth of our platform in that time period within a year. Now this is stepping back and getting outside of the BIM digital workflow and just talking about digital workflows in general. McKinsey said that 3 or 4 years of change happened in 3 weeks when we all had to get home. Understandably, we all had to go there, and you can see North America, where most of us live, it was even more drastic. We were ahead of the curve on the digital, on the path to digital, using digital as our main means of communication, but we surpassed the world in this in 3 weeks. And if we asked our AECO professionals, that's architects, engineers, contractors, and owners, we like to shorten that to AECO. 55% will travel less, 52% say their job has become a lot more digital, and 61% say they will be definitely using more digital tools post-COVID. And their number one tool that they use, ding, 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 is Revit and BIM. That's pretty much the focus, the center, the hub of everything that they do in their workflow. And so COVID-19 was a nice digital catalyst. We need to get there. I'm sure you've heard a million times people saying that the only other industry that is as non-digitized as BIM or as a construction is the farming community. And well, we needed a boost, and we got that boost, and we're all better off for it. Took a little bit of time though, but we're all better off for it because now we're much more efficient in our workflow. So now let's talk about how do we market. We understand now the kind of the workflow and who's using this. Now, how do we as marketing professionals for building product manufacturers use this to our advantage? And I like to include all of these individuals, architects, engineers, contractors, and owners, because any one of them can influence what gets purchased on a project. This is kind of what your product's journey from start to finish is. And at any given time, you can get into this process. Like I could get into jobs. Many of us will provide substitution requests on jobs if we see our competitor in there and get approved on it and ultimately win that job. So you can get in at any level. However, it gets harder as you get more ingrained, because guess what? If you try to get in the bid level, you already have an incumbent, your competitor in there. And it's hard sometimes. I think when I was doing that, I'd win 1 out of 10 of those projects where I tried to swap out my competitor. So the best case scenario is you get that Revit file in there, because that's the first time that they're picking those products. So if you can get that Revit file in there, it will usually make it all the way through to facility management. And so at any given time, you can also, just like you can win a project, if you join it in the bid stage, you can also lose projects. So you have to protect your bids as well, as we're all painfully aware of. But if you get your Revit file in at the beginning, you become the base of design. And as long as you have good information in it and you have good reps and stuff, then you can make sure you get into this 3-part spec. You can get into which gets you into the bid, which then once you're bid out, then you get purchased, and then your product gets installed. The trick with BIM though is it doesn't end there. It used to back in the old days, that's where it ended. Now we're really looking at this to provide the information to the owners that are going to manage this facility. And guess what? Things get broken on site. 5 years down the road, there's going to be a lot of products that were initially installed that are either torn out or damaged and they have to replace it. BIM gives a direct line of sight from the early design stage all the way through to FM. Now, when some scissor lift guy bumps into your wall and pokes a hole in it, they can go and see what drywall is used, what paint was used, what color, exact color was used, what sheen was used on that, maybe what the structural components were in there and any insulation. So they can find that out with a press of a button. They can literally do it now from an iPad, because they don't need to design with it. They just need to see what's on their building. They can connect things like IoT sensors so that they can see when a blower goes out in their HVAC system. They're warned right away. They don't have to wait for a tenant to call them up and say, hey, my room's really hot. That can happen within that digital twin. And that all starts at the foundation of the BIM file. So how do you get your products in front of these individuals? Well, always the best. So you got purchase influence on the left-hand side. So this is how much influence does this method have at what time? And then at the bottom, you have your design stage, your construction stage, bid stage, build stage. There's a lot more stages here, but we've just compacted them down for simplicity's sake. So the number one relationship and the number one interaction and influence that you can have is having your reps one-to-one with the design customers or the build customers. That's why we have reps. We have reps that go out and do box lunches. We have reps that go out and play golf with contractors. Not as much anymore. Nobody has that kind of time, but you know what I'm talking about. So the rep is your relationship. So ultimately, that is going to be your best, most influential way of getting your product known and used in projects. However, reps only have so much time. You can't get around to see 3,000 architects in a year. That's going to be near impossible. So there's other digital ways to get in front of them, and it actually can be ways that will make your reps way more efficient when they do talk to them. So there are a couple different platforms here. We're going to talk about the product selection platforms. This is probably your best purchase influence platform. at that early design stage, because they're looking for products, they're researching products to put in those Revit files that are going to end up in the spec and then be bid on. However, as you go through, most of your products are picked at the beginning, so you get less and less products being picked as you get down the line in the bid stage and build stage. However, general contractors sometimes have to swap out a product that's not even made anymore, so they might have to jump in to a platform like BIM Object to find an alternate item because the item that was spec'd is not available anymore. And so there is still some purchase influence down here. You look at our partner, Ron Blank and Associates. So they do extremely well in a lot of these different areas, quite frankly. However, they're well known for the continuing education. Continuing education is something that architects and engineers take to keep their licenses. And so they are continuously influential through the process, because it's not really based around a project, although sometimes a project will trigger a continuing education, the use of continuing education, because hey, if I have to find a Windows solution, I might as well get a credit there as well. So they'll do that maybe based on products or projects. But then you also have your specification platforms. A lot of times the building products have been chosen before the specs, and they're just using the specs as that construction documentation stage. However, there is still a good time to get involved in specifications. That's why we have our specs written by companies like Ron Blank, because we want to make sure that we're there with that documentation when we need it. Because I'd say the two most important documents that you can use as a manufacturer is your Revit file and your spec document, because those are what actually end up in the project that the subcontractors and general contractors bid on. And then you have other things like project reporting platforms. That's like Construct Connect, which is the new CMD and Dodge Data and Analytics. They get a lot of bidding information. They'll let us know exactly what our spec share is and what's bidding. They just don't do as well up in the early design stage. And I've worked for both Dodge and for CMD, so and I've had to use them as a manufacturer, so I'm well aware of their design stage options. Great thing to look at. Don't ignore them, but they're not going to introduce you to as many projects as these other solutions are. SEO. Some of you might be in the marketing department and live and die by SEO, and I can tell you that because of the digital workflow explosion, SEO is a big part of this, and you can use these digital tools as a way to increase your SEO. Number one, if you're on a platform like BIM Object, Google gives us an unfair advantage because we're the largest in the world, so they consider us to be the most relevant when somebody is looking for a product's BIM or Revit file. And so a lot of times our customers will be at the very top of those Google searches when they're looking for that. And our customers that do really well on their own website with SEO, they'll have the double billing. They'll have the top and the second to the top, because they have they get good SEO on their website as well. So this just increases your chances that anybody doing an organic Google search is going to end up on your product. So that's a nice little side note. Now let's talk about Revit content. So there's a lot of different types of products that go on the projects. And since Revit is literally pretty much used by everybody in North America, if you're working on if you're working on an international company that is looking at Europe and Asia and South America, then in Europe there is a little bit of competition for Revit. It's still very minimal, maybe 10–15%, but there's a product called ArchiCAD. But because of the fact that Revit is so ubiquitous here in the United States, we can really, as manufacturers, focus in on this first and foremost, and then if we have a need later on, we can fill in with ArchiCAD data or other BIM files that are out there. But since we're mostly worried about Revit, we're going to focus in on how Revit deals with products. So the Revit project files, these are .rvt files. These are what your project is made up of. So this is where they take all of your different products and they put them together into a building, whether it's an MEP MEP plan, an architectural plan, a structural plan. They put them all together to create that project, which creates those plan sets. And this is an example of the 3D version of it, but you have windows here, walls, some fireplaces, furniture, carpet, everything's involved. This is your Revit project file, and it's an RVT file. Then you have Revit product files. Revit product files get a little more confusing. That's why I wanted to spend a little time with that. Revit product files are usually parametric, meaning that they allow for more than one product SKU. If you have a window and it can go anywhere from 2 foot by 2 foot to 20 foot by 20 foot, and it can go anywhere in between, that file will be one file. We just create it so that it can stretch and flex to the parameters you need for that project. And then it goes for a lot of other types of files like furniture files and those types of things. So it's parametric. So you don't think of you need a Revit file for each SKU that you provide. Think of it as like if you have a product series, that's usually one file. But everything has to be kind of every file, every product's different, so we have to kind of evaluate them on a one-to-one basis. But ultimately, geometry usually dictates how many types of SKUs are represented in one Revit file. If you have a series of products and they're totally different geometries, those will probably end up being separate files. So Revit families are where most of our products on this conference are going to land. These are the .rfa files. They are used for geometric products like doors and windows, lights, HVAC, furniture, bathroom fixtures, pergolas, kitchen, curtain wall, electronics, loading equipment, medical, plumbing, all those types of products where we're going to create a actual product family. And this is an example of an opening sheet. When somebody opens up your Watson's M2 Revit file, they're going to see an opening sheet where it shows this product series. And you can see all of these different table configurations are available in the actual Revit file. You can see the 3D version of it and the plan view version of it. And then you can use things like marketing to kind of sell the value when they open it. But ultimately, these break down into individual families that they'll click and grab and drag into their project, just like Lego pieces. Revit system families. So these are families that are used for products that are part of a system that are made up of multiple different products from different manufacturers. These are like roofing systems, ceiling systems, wall systems, floor systems. So of course, what's going to be included is paint, drywall, roofing, insulation, structural, flooring, ceiling panels, cement, leveling compounds, adhesives, waterproof brick masonry, ICFs, epoxy, etc. I mean, there's a ton of things that fall in these systems. You can see here, this is an opening page for a brick manufacturer, Landmark Ceramics. You can see some installation pictures, some technical data, measurements, colors, those types of things. And then when you look at them in the actual 3D model, you can see I have a bunch of different designs here, colors of my product, and you can see how that fills in that wall system. So it's not just in this case, I believe this is Eldorado Stone. It's not just Eldorado Stone. They are the top one here. However, there is also mortar scratch, lathe, you got sheathing, plywood, stud layers, insulation, vapor moisture barriers, and gypsum wallboard. And if they were going to paint the interior is on the bottom, the exterior is on the top, they would put a paint, like a Sherwin-Williams paint in there. So that would make up the Revit system family. So if you're a product that goes into a wall, ceiling, roof, or floor, then most likely we're going to be talking to you about Revit system families. And then part of those systems, some of your products really you make use of detailing. So if you're part of a system like roofing, for example, like the C-Plast, you'll see they only make the roofing, but they have to show architects, and architects have to put in the plans how you are to deal with the details. So when you have a penetration coming through, this is how many layers you're going to have at this point. Here's where your cant strips are going to be. Here's where you're going to put your turn bars and clamps and sealants and yada yada. So it dictates to the installer exactly how they're going to do it. So if you have a product that is detailed, that architects use your details on or ask for your details on that show up on the plan sheets, then you're probably going to want to convert those if you have them in DWG or an isometric just drawing, you're going to want to convert them to Revit, because this one detail here will take an architect about 45 minutes to bring over from AutoCAD and recreate in AutoCAD. So it's a large amount of time you're asking them to take your DWGs and convert them to Revit. You're going to have the most success by just providing it to them. So it takes them 2 seconds to find the details they need and drag and drop them. You can see here, CPLAS has 161 details that they provided. And believe it or not, they were blown away when they first launched this. They called me up and they said, Jim, I've never had an architect actually pick up the phone and thank me. But they are doing that now because you're saving them so much time on those details. They're kind of a pain for them to deal with. Now we have a Revit material library. So this kind of fits in with the Revit system families because ultimately these are all materials here. And so when you're talking about material libraries, they're ADSK LIB. ADSK is a stock symbol for Autodesk, and LIB is short for library. So that's an easy way to remember it. It is an Autodesk library. It's not just used in Revit. It can be used in any Autodesk and other third-party softwares as materials. So material libraries are used for materials that make up our products. So a material library could be used for an HVAC because they have metal, they have plastics, they have all sorts of rubber gaskets. So that would all be materials. However, really when we're talking about manufacturers, it's really the manufacturers that do paint, flooring, tile, brick, masonry, ceiling tiles, etc. that are part of these system families where they have a lot of different finish options. Like with paint, there might be 2,000 colors that represent that one paint product. Then we have to create those Revit libraries for that so that instead of them having to go through and pick those files, just like you see here, create them from scratch, because it might take them 10, 20 minutes for each color to get the right information in, then we're going to create those. So you see here, here's the kind of information, even down to the paint level. You have your paint, your name, your description, you have your manufacturer and model, which are the most important things with your color, has a URL back to that product page for my submittal documents if I need them or to get more information. General contractor might put costs in there just to track their costs. Most manufacturers will not put costs in there, but it gets that information because ultimately what we're worried about is getting into the Revit schedule. So all of this work is so that we can get in easily into these Revit schedules, because these Revit schedules will be used for a plan sheet. So we'll see finish schedules, we'll see equipment schedules a lot of times on plan sheets. So we want to make it real easy for us to show up on those schedules, but also they use these schedules to hand over to the specifier to base the design off of these things. So Revit schedules is automated in Revit. So I literally just created a schedule. I was able to put the manufacturer, the model, description. They have any of the metadata that comes along with your object, they can put in here, or they can create their own for your project or for your product. So when you're in the schedules, you make it a lot easier. You can see here there's a lot of blank spaces on this schedule. This is because I used a project that is a generic project from Autodesk. So they usually don't put manufacturer's information in there. So I swapped it out. So a lot of these things are coming in as general, but these days you're going to see architects and engineers relying on the manufacturers that create good Revit objects to fill out these schedules. Because what's the alternative? They have to type it in themselves, and that's a manual process that takes them a long time. So we want to get in those schedules, and that will take us a long way to winning those jobs. So one last thing on complexity, and we'll open this up, or on BIM object, and then we'll open this up for questions. But BIM file development tile depends mainly on complexity. So if you're a paint, it could take us if you only have 16 colors of a paint, let's say you have like just a roofing material that has 16 color options, it might take us an hour to create that. If you're a paint and you have 1,600 or 2,000, well, it's going to take us 2,000 times 5 or 10 minutes to create all the different colors. So it may take 1 hour, it may take 20 or 30 hours for us to create all that metadata. But your average standalone products like furniture, sinks, plumbing, that type of thing, you're talking about 5 to 8 hours there. Doors and windows, especially if they're pocket doors and windows, or they're specialty doors and windows, or lights, if it's linear lights, because their algorithms have to be placed in them to help them stretch. Those can take a little bit longer, 10 hours. And if you get a really complex system like special equipment, it can take even longer. So normally when you're talking to somebody that is talking to you about building your Revit files, there needs to be a quote done, because we have to understand your product's complexities and then put some numbers, hours on it, so then you can understand how many hours it's going to take, and we quote it out from there. So hopefully this has answered most of your questions about BIM. However, there's always questions I didn't think to answer in this deck. So we're going to open it up to ask any questions that you guys have in the audience.
Great, Jim. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned earlier, please go ahead and use that questions box located in the GoToWebinar panel on the right-hand side of your screen to submit any questions you have for Jim regarding the content of this presentation. We have a couple of questions from Terry, so I'll just start with the first one and we'll just kind of go down the list. Our first question is, how does the content from the Revit plans and schedules get into the three-part spec?
So this is an area of development that the industry is working on. So you have Master Spec, BSD Spec Link, and ZeroDocs are three of the specification platforms out there that are working on making this workflow easier. But right now, I believe that Master Spec and BSD have some solutions. I don't think anybody's nailed it and become the standard yet, but mostly what it is there an automated way of doing it? Yes, there is some automation that are built by those providers. However, a lot of it is done in those scheduling. They'll write it, they'll put all their products in, they'll do all that, and then they'll set up those schedules and then hand those schedules over or email those schedules over to the specifier to create the specification. Remember though, 15% of your design customers, that's the same person. So they don't have to do anything. They just got to take what's in their schedule and write specs based on it.
Great, Jim, thank you. Terry would also like to know, how does a manufacturer know who downloads their BIM object? Do they somehow get a name and contact information of that user?
Yeah, yes. So it depends on what platform you're using. If you're on your own if you're hosting on your own website, which is important to do. However, what we found is most downloads are happening. We have a couple customers that use us to download off their website, so we know exactly, we can track it. Most of those downloads are coming from us. So with BIM Object specifically, we do have a participation level that allows you to see who's downloading them and allows you to connect with them via email, LinkedIn, and or pick up the phone and give them a call. Obviously, picking up the phone and giving them a call is the best way. Customers of mine that do that say they get about a 30, well, they said 40 to 50%, but I'm a little conservative, 30 to 40% conversion from that download to a meeting with that architect, engineer, whoever it is that downloaded it. Because guess what? They already downloaded your product. It's not like a cold call. You're calling them, they're already using your product most likely. Now it's just getting in there and learning about their project and making sure they're using the correct information in the correct product.
Great, thanks, Jim. Chris would like to know, if you find many waterproofing manufacturers utilize the Revit marketing?
Yes, so that is one of the waterproofing. I think I did, I'm doing more and more waterproofing now, because remember, 2011 came out, all these architects and engineers were very new to the BIM workflow. They had to go from a 2D workflow to a 3D workflow. So please feel sorry for them, because that was quite a big jump. It's about 10 times harder to do a 3D workflow design than it is a 2D workflow design. So guess what? The owners didn't pay them to do this either. So a lot of times the architects and engineers had to kind of just suck it up and do it. And so for those first years, they were worried about getting doors and windows and walls put up. They weren't necessarily worried about the data that was going in, the products were going in. But right around 2015, 16, that's when you started seeing pretty much every paint manufacturer come in. So that would be similar to waterproofing. It has nothing to do with waterproofing in real life. It's used the same way in Revit. So now we see them using that Revit data. Remember, C-Plast, when they had theirs done 4 years ago, they were getting architects picking up the phone and thanking them for providing that material. So roofing and waterproofing are very important. Zypex is another name that you'll hear in the roofing and waterproofing world that is active in BIM. Is it going to get the same download as windows and doors and lights and furniture? No, but it's definitely going to get plenty of downloads. I have a lot of waterproofing customers that have stayed with us over the years because they see huge value in that platform and getting their name out.
Great, Jim. Thank you. Our next question is from Bob, and he would like to know, how often should the BIM files be updated by the manufacturer?
As often as you change your products or your website and your URL. So anytime data changes, you should update those Revit files. It's not as bad as it sounds. We have customers that just know they're going to change them twice a year. Yeah, they're going to change something, a spec on their product twice a year. In which case, they will put together a maintenance program with us, a BIM maintenance program with us. It's a very low dollar volume program where anytime metadata changes on it, you tell us, we go in and fix it and update the file. So that's one way to deal with it. Metadata is fairly easy. So that's one of the things that if you're just changing metadata, like you change your URL to your product page, you might you could almost buy a license and do it yourself. Although, use us to teach you how to do it. But it's fairly simple, and I do believe that in the future they'll get more and more simple for manufacturers to keep that metadata up. Geometry, on the other hand, if you're making major geometric changes, number one, you have to determine whether or not it's going to make a design impact. In other words, if it's just a tiny little thing, like you had a exposed screw and now it's not exposed, most likely engineers, architects are not worried about that because they're not worried about that in the design of the building. They're not looking for micro little changes like that. So that's not a big deal. But if you change the wholesale, like if you have a square mirror or a square panel and you now do something to it that changes it completely, then yes, you're going to have to either have that Revit file updated or a new Revit file created for you. But there are things that change quite frequently, like lights. When we switched to LED, a lot of people were going for incandescent or other types of lights to the LED. So there was a lot of changes, but now that's starting to settle down. We're not seeing as many changes. A lot of customers go back every couple of years to update their files.
Great, Jim. I think we've got time for one more question here. So Peter says that he's in HVAC and he doesn't want to put too much or too little information, but how does he determine the right parameters for metadata in a family model?
Very good question. I love this question. This question is one that we tackle every day because it's like the Goldilocks. We got to find that Goldilocks zone, right? It can't be too hot. It can't be too cold. It's got to be just right. And we're never going to make every BIM manager happy. So you build your Revit files to about 80% or to please 80% of the people, because some people are just not going to like it no matter how you provide it. So that's the dance that we play over here. And so realistically on HVAC, there are some very important, like your MEP data, your anything that your mechanical, electrical, plumbing attachments, you need to have that in there. The metadata part of it, you can get your flow data, your BTU data, all your cooling data in there. So there's a lot of data that you should put in there, and there's a lot of data you may want to leave out and have it externalized. And that's really a perfect situation where we bring at BIM Object, we have two of the best BIM experts in the world, Armando Darling and Jackie Doak. Armando comes from Autodesk. He was with me at Autodesk for 13 years. He basically taught most of your MEP and architects how to use Revit. So he's the perfect person to ask that question of, and he'll answer that question much more in depth than I would. But we, in our process of evaluating your brand and your products, on the content side, we will guide you as to the best case scenario. If you want us to put tons of information in, we'll do it. We may tell you not to, because the one thing you don't want to do is have too much geometric information, because the first thing an architect or engineer is going to look at when they look at your file is how big is it. We try to hit the Goldilocks zone of 0.5 meg to 1 meg max. Literally, if your product gets over 1 meg, it starts making BIM managers worry that you have too much information in there. The nice thing about that is metadata does not carry a lot of weight when it comes to the size of the file. It's a lot of times the geometry, especially furnitures where you have a lot of different contours. That creates a lot of polygons and NURBs, and so we try to reduce that down as much as possible. Remember, this is not to create marketing documentation that looks like real life. This is to create plans and spec first. They can do renderings off of it. However, especially in the HVAC world, probably not going to do too much not going to care about too much rendering your product. They really just need that evaluation, the data that is going to impact the performance of that building. So any of that data should be included. Any other data should be considered to be left out. However, I'm always going to rely on my experts to actually help you out with that question. So I would highly encourage you, if you have that question, to just hop on with Armando, Jackie, or I should say, because I'd need them on there with me to really understand your situation and give you a good guidance there. And that usually only takes 15, 20 minutes.
Great, Jim. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and close off the Q&A portion of your presentation. Do you have anything else to add for us about BIM Object and what you guys have to offer?
Well, no, I mean, I think I got to drop our name a bunch during that. I don't want to make this a commercial for BIM Object. So I would highly encourage you. There are a lot of platforms out there. We have the most eyeballs. We have a great platform. We make great content. We can guide you in your marketing efforts or your technical documentation efforts. Give us a shot, give us a call, and we'll definitely help you out. And if it works out, then we'll be happy to have you as customers.
Great, Jim. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I do see that several more of you had questions for Jim, so fear not, we will get those over to him and he'll be able to answer you in a one-on-one email. I also see several of you asking about a recording for today's session. We will be sending that out in the next couple of days. By the end of the week, you should receive that from us. If you don't, feel free to reach out to us at webinars@infospecinc.com and we'll get that taken care of for you. Thank you again for your attendance today, and we look forward to seeing you on our next Manufacturer Web Series. Thank you.